So glad to stand here to present our team's work. The name of our work is Picturing Oneself, Camera Use in Zoom Classes During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And first, I will briefly introduce myself. And I am currently a PhD candidate in Information Science Technology at Pennsylvania State University. And my advisor is John M. Carroll. And my research interests range from learning science to human-computer interaction to CSW and community informatics. And in this presentation, I will talk about some key points. The first is I will talk about the study motivation, and then I will briefly introduce the related work and literature review, and also the objective of this study, as well as the methodology and interview design process. And then I will delve into the major findings and discussion part. Finally, I will talk about the limitation and the future work. So firstly, the motivation of this study. As we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic broke out like 2 years ago. And because of the global crisis, a lot of universities locked down and in-person classes have been moved to online mode. And we noticed that among all of the issues caused by online education, one significant issue was that a lot of students, they are not so willing to open their cameras, and because students they prefer like closing their cameras, this will cause teach instructors who rely on students nonverbal cues. So right now they cannot rely on the nonverbal cues uh to like to evaluate whether the students understand their teaching or not. So in this study, we aim to understand the factors that influence students camera use when they were taking synchronous online classes on Zoom. And the second part, I will talk about the related work. Um, the first part of the related work is camera use in emergency online education. So after conducting exhaustive literature review, we found that some previous survey studies reviewed a couple of factors that prevent students from opening cameras. For example, like student-teacher relationship, and students they are like of insensitive to open cameras, and also they have concerns about their appearance and also about privacy issue. However, in this paper, we seek to conduct more in-depth analysis through semi-structured interviews on different population of students. Because previous survey studies, although they identified some factors about why students not willing to open cameras, but they didn't explain like why these factors contribute to students' unwillingness to open cameras. But in this study, we want to delve more into this topic. And the second part of the of the related work is about the theory that we used in our study. It's objective self-awareness theory. So this theory refers to that when oneself becomes an object of their conscious awareness, they start self-evaluate. For example, like when you stand in front of a mirror or in front of a camera, like you try to behave yourself, and you try to like you just try to like correct your behaviors to make yourself look better. And in this study, we want to understand like how does objective self-awareness manifest in the context of virtual online classes. And the third part of the related work is about the differences between domestic students and international students in the US. So as we all know that the US has one of the largest population of international students in the world. And because international students they went to another country to study, so some of them may face some like challenges when they study here. For example, like previous studies reviewed that some international students might have language barriers, and they may feel like they are minority, and they are lack of social support. In this study, we aim to identify the factors that impact international students' perception of camera usage and how may these factors differ from those impacting domestic students. So to summarize, our research objectives include the following 4 points. The first one is we try to understand students, like no matter they are domestic students or international students, their camera use practices during emergency online learning. And we reported their experience, the reasons behind their camera usage in different classes and situations. And second, we want to understand the commonalities and differences between the two groups of students. And based on our findings, we provided insights and recommendations into the design of online classes and platforms. And also we provide some design implications to improve camera technology as well as the security of video conferencing platforms. So next part, I will talk about the methodology we used in this study. So because this study is based on a previous university-wide survey, this survey was aimed at like collecting feedback from instructors and students about their teaching and learning experience in the spring of 2021 at Pennsylvania State University. And the recruitment part for this study, first, we sent out emails to recruit domestic students who filled out the previous survey. However, we found that like students who filled out the survey are all identified with domestic students. So to recruit like international students, we used proposal sampling and such as Snowball, like to recruit international people by sending them emails and or sending them like messages on social media. And our data collection. So in the end, we ended up with like 13 semi-structured interviews uh, with uh, with students. 8 of them are international students and 5 are American students. And each interview lasted 45 minutes to 60 minutes. This is the table of the demographic information of our participants in this study. So the DS represent domestic students, IS represent the international students. We can see that uh, the international students, they came to the US, like some of them just stay here for like a couple of months because they were freshmen, and some of them like stay there like for 3 years. So we only focus on international students who came to US between a couple of months to 3 years. And for domestic students, like all of them were born in the US. And we try to recruit students from a very very diverse majors. So all of them like came from different majors. And the next part, I will talk about our interview design. So we designed 2 interview protocols for both domestic and international students. In the protocol for domestic students, we include 22 questions, and for international students, we had like 24 questions. The only difference between the 2 protocols is that we try to like ask international students about their learning adjustment experience after they came to US to study. The reason why we want to ask this question because we want to understand like whether international students confronted with some like extra challenges when they came to US to study, and we want to understand like why those kind of challenges impacted their camera usage in online classes. So because we conducted this study during pandemic, so all of the interviews were conducted on Zoom. And there are some example of interview questions. All of the interview questions designed to like examine the experience and backstories that participants had with camera use. So we try to understand their stories, their experience when they took online classes. Some examples of questions such as like, when did you feel comfortable or frustrated when with opening cameras in classes, and how you feel about your image being visible to others after you open your cameras, and what did you do when most of your classmates opened their cameras or closed their cameras? So next part, I will talk about the major findings we got from the interview data, and we conducted thematic analysis. And after thematic analysis, we found that the first big part of the findings is about the commonalities between domestic students and international students. And the 3 big themes are class characteristics, interactivity, as well as privacy. So the class characteristics has some sub-themes. The first one is class size, and the second is class duration. The third one is class type, and the final is teaching mode. So next, I will talk about like the explanations of those subthemes. Class size means that we notice that students who took classes who like attended a very large class, for example, like a class of over 100 students. In this very large class, like students, they prefer closing their cameras because they don't want to be like the spotlight of the whole class, especially when majority of students close their cameras. And class type means that in some specific class, such as PE class or public speech, in those kind of classes, the instructors would strongly encourage students to open their cameras to evaluate their performance. Because the instructors need to see the students' expressions, see their postures to evaluate whether they do the right thing. So in this kind of classes, students are more likely to open cameras. Class duration refers to that if this class is a very long class, for example, like if it's over 2 hours, like students, they prefer closing their cameras to take breaks, or they prefer like doing some random other things. The teaching mode means that in discussion-based class, students, they are more likely to open their cameras to discuss with their peers or instructors. But if it's like a lecture-based class, students, they prefer closing their cameras because they thought that there's no reason to open cameras. They can only like listen to the lecture as podcast. And there are some quotes from our participants. And we can see that the left quote, this student mentioned that like he has a class that include over 300 people. So in this class, he never opened his camera. And also this domestic student mentioned that he took a PE class, and in this class, the instructor required them to open cameras. And for the international student 6, like this student mentioned that if there is like a discussion in class, he would open his cameras. But if it's just completely like looking through the PowerPoints, he never turn on his camera. And the second major theme is interactivity. So we noticed that students had a strong tendency to turn on their cameras was during breakout rooms on Zoom, especially when the atmosphere is interactive in breakout rooms. So this student mentioned that like when he was in breakout rooms, like especially when other peers like were engaged in discussions, he would more likely to open his cameras to talk with other people. And the third theme is about privacy. So we noticed that some students, they would likely to close their cameras because they are afraid that their privacy might be might be leaked by opening their cameras, and they want to protect their privacy. And this student mentioned that I won't open my cameras because I'm concerned about my data security, because this student has seen people joining the class and doing things like yelling or verbally attacking people. So he thought that if he opened cameras, like he thought that if he opened cameras, like his privacy might be like leaked. And this is a code table that illustrates the commonalities between domestic students and international students. And the count means that how many students mention this in the interviews. And the next big part of the findings is about the differences between domestic students and international students. So it's pretty interesting because we found that for domestic students, their attitude towards camera use is positive or at least neutral. But for international students, they are like very negative towards camera use. So to investigate why this difference exists, we just identified some factors that contribute to this kind of difference. So these factors are language barrier, time zone difference, feeling of minority academic performance, as well as classroom expectation and objective self-awareness. So to explain the themes, the language barrier means that some students who came to US, especially for those who just stay here for a very short period of time, some of them had language barriers, and they feel afraid to like speak up in class. So like they prefer closing their cameras to avoid, speaking with native speakers, something like that. And for time zone difference, we noticed that students who came to some students even though they took classes, but they stayed in their home country. And for those kind of students, they faced time zone difference, and some of them took classes at very inconvenient times. For example, during middle nights. So this kind of issue prevented them from opening cameras. And the third one is perceived of being minority. Some students we interviewed mentioned that they feel that they are minority in a foreign classroom. This kind of led them to international students, like they feel just insecure and hesitant to show themselves on camera. And the next part is academic performance. So this is interesting because we noticed that for international students, they try to associate their camera use with their scores they got in this class. But for domestic students, they associate camera use more with their interest in this class. For example, one international student mentioned that if I got a high score in this class, I would more likely to open my cameras and show myself to other people. Classroom expectation. So we noticed that international students, they are not so familiar with the classroom expectations in a foreign classroom. Some students mentioned that they try to close their cameras because they are afraid that the instructors will call on them to answer questions. So this kind of like feeling prevented them from like opening cameras. And objective self-awareness, we notice that compared with domestic students, international students tend to have heightened objective self-awareness. This kind of heightened objective self-awareness might be attributed to their obstacles in a foreign country. For example, like as I just mentioned, some of them had language barriers and they feel they are minority, something like this. And there are two quotes from our participant. So this participant mentioned that he felt very stressful, like because he had language barrier, and I feel like I won't speak because I'm already nervous about it. And this participant mentioned that sometimes I feel a bit insecure because I'm Asian. I'm not the majority of students in the class, and and he felt that some Americans think that Asian students are a bit hard to communicate with or something like that. This kind of stereotype prevented her from opening cameras. And also, there are three quotes from our participants that illustrate the academic performance, objective self-awareness, and classroom expectation impacted their camera usage. And this is a quote table between domestic and international students. And also there is a code that I didn't mention before, is self-appearance. We noticed that uh, most female participants we interviewed in this study, they mentioned that like if they didn't wear makeup, they would never open their cameras. But if they wear makeup, they would like more likely to open their cameras. And the discussion part, uh, in the discussion, we propose some suggestions for online classes design in the future to encourage students to open cameras. First thing, we think that it's important to improve students' awareness. So because as we all know that instructors know that opening cameras would be beneficial for their teaching, but students, they didn't know this. So we think that it's important for students to know that opening their cameras is good for both teaching and their learning. And also we suggested that classes should add some discussion and group work. For example, especially for large class, they should include some class activities or class discussions, preferably in between the topics covered in lectures, to reduce students' cognitive load and physical strain from prolonged screen time. And the third part, we think that it's important for instructors to create theme-based breakout rooms. We suggest that each breakout room can just start with a different discussion topic, and allowing also the instructors should allow students the agency to move from one Zoom to another to engage more like multiple discussions. And also besides Zoom, we noticed that like some other alternative platforms create a can facilitate a better personal presence, such as gather town platform. So we suggest that maybe the instructors they can try different platforms. And the next part, because we noticed that some international students, they are more anxious about opening cameras. To help them reduce the camera-associated anxiety, we suggested that the students who experience camera-related anxiety, they can practice opening cameras in relatively informal occasions, such as club meetings and group project meetings. This technique is named systematic desensitization. So this technique has proved to be effective in addressing situation-specific anxieties in different situations, such as speech anxiety or math anxiety. Privacy concerns, we suggest the instructors share privacy guidelines with students and show them the best practices in protecting their online identity. And also, we expect that once students feel more secure about their digital protection, they will also be more willing to open their cameras. And the next part, the final part is of our discussion is we propose some technology design implication. The first thing we suggest that the camera on Zoom can be designed, because right now on Zoom we cannot exchange our eye contact. When you stare at somebody, it's impossible for us to have eye contact on Zoom, because so we suggest that maybe in the future they can integrate the state-of-the-art camera technologies to enhance the learning experience. They can use computer vision technique to make this work out. And some previous studies have done this before. And improve the next part, we suggest that the Zoom platform can improve discoverability of some features. For example, when we interview students, we notice that some of them never know that there are some features, such as head, self-view, auto captioning. All of these features are important for them. For example, if this student is anxious about opening cameras, and he can just open head self-view, so he wouldn't enter the state of objective self-awareness. This would encourage them to open cameras. And also for international students, if there is auto captioning, maybe it's better for they would feel more comfortable of following the native speakers. The limitation and future work, because in this study we only recruited 13 people, so the participant sample is small. And other than that, all of the international students came from either China, Taiwan, and Korea. In the future, we think that conducting interviews, studies on a more nationally and culturally diverse sample for both domestic and international groups would likely yield more new insights not reported in this work. And secondly is that in this study, we didn't consider cultural factors, which might be used to explain the difference between domestic and international students. In the future, maybe the Hofstede 5 dimensions of culture, such as collectivism, individualism, and power distance, can be used as learns to characterize prominent cultural factors that may manifest in their online learning tendencies. And third limitation is that this study dichotomize the interviewee's background into domestic and international. Future research can measure how students' learning experience and perception of camera use change based on the amount of time they have spent in the US. So we assume that because some international students, they just came to US for a very short period of time. So we assume that if they stay here for a longer time, for example, 5 years, 6 years, maybe they feel more comfortable adapting to this learning environment, and they are more likely to open their cameras. That's all of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Hi, so one of the biggest factors I found for students turning on cameras or not was whether the session was being recorded. So if it was being recorded, basically no one would put their camera on. And that was problematic. So we ended up in a situation where we'd say we'd have 25 minutes, then we'd have a discussion. I'd make sure that recording was off, and suddenly all the cameras would come back on.
Yeah, I think it's also because like maybe students they are concerned that they're themselves or recorded, so they don't want to like uh maybe they don't want this recording include their appearance, something like that.
Hi, I'm here. I have a question. I'm Jumana, PhD student at MIT. My question is regarding the camera use. Have you explored if students, especially those who are concerned about their appearance, about their use of backgrounds or filters that smoothes the skin or changes the light or changes the background? Did anyone talk about this in your population or have you explored it?
Yes, some students mentioned that like because they don't want to like review their surroundings or their background, so they prefer closing their cameras, and that was written in the paper, but I didn't talk about that part in this presentation.
Hi. So, based on all this work you've done and your experience in this, do you think it would be beneficial for students overall if we forced them to turn on their cameras? Like if
Uh,
you said, no, no, you have to turn on your camera if you're here.
Yeah, in the discussion part, we recommended that instructors shouldn't say that we require you to open cameras, because some students like uh, they are they don't like reviewing their appearance in the cameras, so we don't suggest this instructors force students to open their cameras, but we just suggest that maybe in your class you can redesign your class to make it more interactive, or you can like tell students that some privacy guidelines to make them feel more comfortable, like in this class, to feel more secure in this class, like using other ways to encourage them instead of just to say that, oh, you have to open the cameras in class.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the pure access to hardware. Is it possible that students simply do not have a camera, or their smartphone is so old that it wouldn't suffice to participate via video, or
Yes,
internet constraints whatsoever? I mean, you need a certain upload.
yes. I remember like one of our participants mentioned that he didn't want to open cameras because every time he opened cameras, the internet would be very bad, and he couldn't like attend the class smoothly. So every time he met this issue, he just turned off cameras. Because this factor was also like identified in previous survey studies. So in this study, we didn't focus too much on this part. We just try to present some findings, some level findings that never appeared before.
Can I squeeze one last? I will start in the next one.
This is a quick one. You recommended like Gather Town or like alternative software. How are they different from Zoom? Like what makes it different or better for students?
Because on Gather Town, like the students, they can move themselves, they can move around, and also like they have a, animated character that represent themselves. They can just move around. So this can like this more simulate real world experience. But we investigate that uh, it's better for instructors to combine like both Zoom with other platforms, because GatherTown also has some other issues. But for presentation, maybe students they can use GatherTown to present. But for taking classes, they can use Zoom because GatherTown can distract students based on previous study.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.